Welcome, and thanks for joining us for the Global Data Vault June webinar about patching, why it's so critical, and when and how often you should do it. I am Trista Perot, Director of Marketing for Global Data Vault. I'm super appreciative that I'm not in charge of patching. However, I've got a couple of experts that we're going to talk to today about it. So they are going to cover the topic in total. They're going to talk about what to patch, why patching is so essential, how often it should be done, how it applies to your SLA, and so much more. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping items for you. If you need to leave the webinar early, no problem. It'll be available for replay after the event in 3 ways. We will have it on our website. We are also streaming live to Facebook and YouTube, and you can find the recordings there. And then lastly, we love your questions. So we're going to keep the dialogue box open in chat. So go ahead and put your questions in there. We'll be certain to circle back around and answer those at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me introduce our speakers today. Part of our team in chat, they're invisible, but available in chat to answer quick questions. We have both Brian Brignac and Leslie Ferris of Global Data Vault. And for our speakers today, those handsome guys are in the bubbles. We've got Kelly Caldwell in product marketing and Tom May, our CIO. With that, let me hand it over to Kelly to get us started.
Thanks, Trista. I'm also glad that I'm not in charge of patching anymore. I've had my fair share of it, so I'm familiar with the topic. And obviously, Tom is very familiar with it. We'll be hearing a lot of personal stories and real-world scenarios. So the first thing about why patch management is critical is obviously going to be cybersecurity. It's something that's top of everybody's mind. Everybody worries about it. And what you don't always understand is that every piece of hardware that's in your environment, and even the software, requires patches. You think about all the routers, switches, servers, hypervisors, anything that basically provides technology is going to need some type of a patch or firmware update or something at some point, because they're going to be at risk otherwise. It's best to have a defensive action. You don't want to wait for the risk. You don't want to wait for the threat of the virus to come get you before you prevent against it. Sort of like why we get flu shots or why you take vitamins or other things like that. You take a little bit of preventative action before something happens to you. And in this example here, according to the recent study by Fortinet, 90% of attacks utilize vulnerabilities known for 3 or more years and 60% for 10 years. We had a virus a few years ago that used a vulnerability that had been patched by Microsoft for about 3 or 4 years. And there were so many people that just had not applied the patch that it spread rampantly around the world. So it's important, as we talk about patch management, to be like, maybe I don't need to do that. No, you do need to do that. All right, Tom, here's the topics that we're going to cover with this. Why is patching often overlooked? Fear of the patch. It's time consuming. It's complex. Downtime, we test it. Patching's not a popular topic. It's not something people really want to talk about. It's not something people want to do or look forward to do. But as we've already identified, it's necessary. So let's look at these in depth. So time consuming. Tom, what do you think out of these, operating systems and applications, the tools, automated or manual, do you download the patches automatically? Do you apply them automatically or whatnot? What do you think about time consuming, or what is most time consuming when it comes to patching?
I think every day becomes much more time consuming with patches. Security is at the forefront of everything in this world anymore. Gone are the days of quarterly patches, monthly patching, but coming up with the right patch methodologies, the accountability on it, the audit, the vulnerability, the ability, does it break something or not? I think it said fear before. It's just becoming more and more the forefront of an organization. That's why we have CISOs now. We really have to make sure that security is there, and patching is just that level. Every week, there's more and more and more. I mean, it's like a full-time gig for an organization to make sure you're patched.
Yeah, and I remember times when we would actually have to download the patches manually. Maybe before some of the higher end tools to do this for you, you'd go into the server and you download all the patches manually. Now, one thing I do want to recommend is that you do not turn on automatic updates for your servers. We'll get into that a little bit more. You think that could save you some time by doing it for you, but it really puts yourself at more risk and causes more problems it can help. So if you want to download the patches ahead of time, there's ways to do that will save you time when your actual patch window comes, right? So we talk about patch stacking. and being able to apply the patches that are needed at the same time versus letting them pile up, like you're saying, gone are the days of the quarterlies, right? So what do you think about that? Obviously, it's going to be easier to apply them more frequently versus you wait until you have 110 of them.
No, I agree because patch stacking is so dangerous. When you look at a long patch window, and even once a month, you have Patch Tuesday by Microsoft, you have your vendor, you stack all those in there. You might have to do cyclical reboots of 4, 5, 6, 7 times. You may have to see what applied, what didn't, and realize you need longer maintenance windows, and you're affecting your deliverable in that sense. A lot of times we're not in clustered environments, and that's a challenge to be able to tell stakeholders your system will be down. But it's that double-edged sword. I need to take it down to maintain uptime and security versus now I'm offline and I'm not delivering it because I'm always patching it. Which is the lesser of the evils? I'll always go towards the security side and say, I'd rather be secure and be able to deliver, because when you fail and you're not secure, it's an indefinite. You're calling Global Data Vault to save you at that point. Let's prevent the issue by having a little bit more downtime. So patch stacking, I've seen a patch stack for even in a week to hit 4 or 5 hours, honestly. It's insane.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we'll talk about testing in a little bit, but when you get in a phase where you're applying so many patches and one of them breaks, it's really hard to know which one of them broke and why when that many. So that adds to some of the complexity and things like that. So I know you mentioned clustering, which helps with patching, but it also, you talk about clustered services when we're speaking, primarily like Microsoft clustering services, but there's other ways to do it, especially with hypervisors and virtual machines like that. That could introduce its own complexity, but it could also help, with downtime and preventing issues. What are your experiences with that?
So clustering is really challenging. It comes down to the operating system that you're clustering. For example, Microsoft itself, let's say in a Hyper-V environment, they've actually taken great strides to be able to handle the patch level. So the theory in the cluster is all nodes have to be on the same level. How do you maintain this? So clusters, you're able to fail a node and keep service delivery up. When we start patching, we kind of break that a little bit. Microsoft has done a great job of allowing us to patch through and inject patches across the cluster and maintain uptime. But as you move into different systems of clustering, Citrix systems and whatnot, it becomes a little more complex into there. Remembering that when we try to patch things, often people use third-party tools. If you're in Microsoft, are you running SCOM or are you running a third-party patch? We at Global Data Vault use third-party tools because they go across multiple operating systems and they give the compliance reporting in there. It gives the patch labbing. It gives us auto approvals. It fits into change management. That's all great. But do they interject in with the clusters so well? Well, I'll be the first one to tell you, no, we need different methodologies for our clusters. Very hard. So I can use the reporting and compliance to my third party, but clustering, I love that it's in there, but wow, what a whole other world. But I know my customer likes to cluster because it stays on. It's that always on scenario. So yeah, clustering's the thing, good and bad.
Yep. And we know about automated versus manual, good and bad of those, right? So if you're manual, the complexity becomes for the person applying the patch, for experience with doing that. How many different systems are they doing at a single time? You look at automated patching, that saves the man hours, but then you have to back end that automated patching. You have to have the systems and thing or the whatever it is to be able to do that. And also to monitor the patches and say, hey, okay, this system paused at this reboot or, during this patch or whatever, and be able to give you that information. So pros and cons to both, but also, complexities there.
Yeah, and bringing up your staging patches. I mean, many people we'll go ahead and stage the patch. So the concept here is through some method, patches are downloaded and ready for install at reboot. Well, what happens when you have that firestorm come through and you have to reboot that server because you got a BSOD, it locked up, you reboot it. Now you're into a patch cycle to come up. You could be 4 hours of downtime. So again, it's always your risk analysis and whatnot in there. It's funny, change management and timing. It's like I'm reading ahead.
Yeah, and when you use things like build servers or automated patch systems, pull those patches down to the server itself or to a central network location so that you're not waiting on download speeds and whatnot while you're actually trying to do the maintenance window. But don't install them right? To your point, because if something else happens and you have to reboot that system beforehand, you've just applied all those patches, right? So it's cool to pre-download them, not cool to pre-install them, right?
Right. Yep.
So we've talked about downtime and change management and the timing of things. You mentioned Patch Tuesday, which anybody who's been in IT for any length of time knows what Patch Tuesday is. Other vendors release patches as needed or other times. But when we talk about downtime, there's a good downtime and a bad downtime, right? So the good downtime is the one that's through change management. It's timed, it's prepared, it's planned for, does not count as an outage because it is maintenance. The bad downtime is anything that happens outside of a planned change management or a maintenance window, regardless of what it is. So it's always difficult and challenging to schedule downtime. Easier for smaller organizations, right? Harder, the bigger you get, the more servers, the more lines of businesses or other applications that are impacted, the more people you have to contact and coordinate testing and all of that. And then processing schedules around the month. Is it busy at certain times of the month? Can we not process or can we not patch and reboot servers during that? I know that you used to work for a firm that did a lot of processing at times. How did you guys handle that?
Well, you really have to look to say, when does it make sense to do it? And the answer always is never. But what you have to do is you look at your utilization times on your system. So if you come around your methodology of monthly, weekly, whatnot, you have to look at your operational loads. I like to think of, I use Global Data Vault as an example versus traditional IT. I think it speaks well to it. So traditional IT, when do we patch? Nights and weekends. Well, if I'm a service provider for backups, when am I getting backups? Nights and weekends. Therefore, I have an inverse patching. And so hitting certain systems, that takes them offline. So I like to counter with what's more important, a good, known, safe backup that can deliver that could be slightly older or nothing at all. That's really what we're talking about with patching. So at Global Data Vault, let's say certain systems are patched during the day. Now, let's say you're on a high availability system. When would we take that one down? Well, we look at our SLA delivery. If a Cloud Connect is a 4 or 8 hour, well, I can affect that on a schedule. But if I'm into a tight 1 hour, hey, I have to interface with the customer to say, when does it make sense for that backup to go down? Because it must be shut off. When we do that, hey, they may say 2 o'clock in the morning. We schedule that. Does that affect my SLA? No, because planned maintenance is not a denial or failure of an SLA. That's incorporated in there. When we talk about 4 nines and 5 nines, we work around the methodology of planned versus unplanned. So if I just shut you off, wow, I failed your SLA. If I bring you up, that's a different story. And then honestly, in the backup business, it's the deliverable of the backup that goes into there. So you have to know your business and deliverable to be able to plan your schedule and your down. But you must hold this truth. And then I'll end here is, what is better? A system that is down and will come back up, or a system that is permanently crushed because of security vulnerabilities? You don't want to be in the second camp. Err on the side of caution.
From my own personal experience, the whole change management side of that, if you fail a patch, if something happens during your change management window, you have that amount of time to fix it or back out of it, right? Or undo everything that you can undo and try again another day, figure out what happened. So if you have something happen during the middle of your change management window and you exceed that, well, guess what? That becomes the bad downtime. And it's even worse because you failed your change. You failed everything that you said you're going to do. So now you have to do additional steps to get everything back. It becomes a whole big hassle. And we'll talk about that a little bit more with testing.
Right. And to build on that, what do? Do you pad your times? Well, there's an acceptable level of pad, but you can't say, well, I need a 10-hour maintenance window. Oh, look, it only took 45 minutes. No, should have been an hour or 2. You have to play that game in there. And it's a tough game. It really is.
Yeah. And like you were saying, it really depends on the customers. It depends on SLAs. It depends on when their systems can be down. And that goes back to a little bit of clustering, goes back to building in redundance. And when you look at modern applications, things that are cloud-based or things that have multiple front ends, little bit easier to get away with taking one system down at a time than it used to be, with physical servers being the key to everything. Getting into the testing, and this goes into fear of the patch a little bit, but how many times have you seen a bad patch? Let's say Microsoft releases something and it's a patch and maybe not a 0-day, it's not critical, whatever, but there was something wrong with the code and you apply it.
Oh, every time I see the word net framework, I just want to curl up in the corner and cry. It's so scary because what breaks? Rarely is it the operating system, right? It's always our applications. Did our vendor vet it? I mean, they're getting the patch the same time we are. If they're in the Microsoft ecosystem, sure, they can get ahead and QC it, but is there a wide adoption? Not until Patch Tuesday. So yeah, every time I see that, I'm like, oh my good Lord, risk reward, put it on fast. Wait a little bit and be vulnerable. What's the right thing,
Yeah, that's why it's always good to test those patches. Even, people are like, well, Microsoft released it. It must be good. Windows update done. Right?
Yeah.
And stuff blows up. Always test stuff in the lab. And the cool thing about what we use with Veeam availability and Veeam backup replication is that you don't have to have a dedicated lab for that. Veeam gives you the ability to turn on your backups and do all kinds of testing in that. They pioneered this a long time ago. It's been, I think, one of the best features that they've ever released is the whole instant Veeam recovery and sure backup and the Veeam data labs, just for that reason. So if you're like, well, I don't have the capability to test everything because I don't have labs, I can't duplicate my environments. Well, guess what? You don't have to. And you can use things like that, right?
I love to speak to data labs. Take it out of the patching, take it on the upgraded application. I have server that does this. I need to put the new vendor version on. So I don't have a lab. What do? Well, let me spin up a net new server. Let me install this. Let me put a data set in there. Wow, it works. We got through all the kinks. Tear it down, go back to your prod, bring it up, nothing but trouble. With data labs, how cool is it that you can bring it all up on the actual replica of a production machine, test it all. If you like it, roll that into prod. Holy cow, does that make life easier? Now you're not two production environments trying to keep them mirrored and they're not really the same. Data lab, if I were to be a cool guy, would say it's the cat's meow, really. But I'm a cool guy. You see how I delivered that, Kelly? Just like IT guy all day long.
You really got me now. No, to your point, with people who do have labs, it's really common that they've got the lab, but it's running different versions of things. It's running a free version of a product. It's running a non-licensed version of a product. It's running a lower version of a product because it's just a lab. So when you go and you bring production system testing into that, it could be fine and dandy. And like you're saying, you take it back into something that's running different versions, different types, stuff blows up. And that's why it's important to have that end user validation. As IT people, we can say everything's cool. I mean, the stuff, I checked all the boxes, it pings, comes up, it looks like all the appropriate services are running. I'm good to go. And you move on to the next. And then all of a sudden the end users come in and say, this box isn't connecting to the database anymore. Like it can't, our application isn't working. So when we do testing, as we do with our DR testing, you got to get the end users involved so that they can make sure that everything runs the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and at Global Data Vault Patch Labs, we take a sample subset of production machines and put them in what we call a test lab. So I have like a dev lab that is, hey, these are some VDI connects. I'm going to apply patches. How does it work? Great, looks good. Now, let me go to my next lab, which is a small subset, one or two of each in the environment. It is a prod machine. Release it out and wait for user feedback. If we get bad, we disapprove the patch, we roll it back, we're good. Our DR strategy helps us through that. If it green lights, we approve it, and it goes for mass deployment until we have our installation window. Labs are critical, not just data labs, but your patch lab methodologies.
Yeah, so mentioning that, people might ask, how can end users get access to a Veeam data lab, which used to be called Sure Backup and Sure Replica, et cetera? When you power those things on, aren't they going to be a conflict in the production environment? I mean, how can you have both of those on at the same time? And there's where the magic happens, right?
There you go. That's the whole concept of Veeam. It's a container. It's a separate network. It's isolated off. It allows through certain traffic or not. Put it on the web, not on the web. Let it run in its container. In fact, what's even awesomer, I don't know if that's a word, but
awesomer?
Yeah, as we think about a system and the always on mentality, it's app delivery. It's not a SQL server. It's a web front end, SQL back end together. You can put all three systems into the data lab, let them communicate to each other and see how that patch drives. You can even put a virtual workstation in there to do the client server side. You really do get a great validation from your users that can say, yeah, we agree as stakeholders, make this go or no go. It's not that one system. That's the powerful part while production's running. There's zero downtime here. It's amazing. I love data labs.
Yep. One of my favorite features for sure. So after testing, we come to the fear of the patch. And again, everybody who's done anything in IT knows what this is. It's the culmination of everything that we just talked about. What's it going to break?
Yeah.
Right. I am not going to apply this patch to my production SQL server or your favorite .NET framework because I don't know what it's going to break, right? It goes back up to testing, but still, I don't want to apply these 60 patches that are now overdue because it's probably going to break something. And then another month goes by and another month goes by and all of a sudden you have all sorts of issues. You know, as IT folks, we know that rolling back from patches is difficult, can be difficult, right? With the appropriate systems and softwares and things like that, Wink in place, it's pretty easy to do. You talk about deployment across time zones. You know, if you're doing something on the East Coast versus the West Coast, depending on where your production, your database, and all these other things are located, you could have cross impacts. It could cause bigger issues. And then always vendor support, right? If we are patching the firewall and we patch a router and they're different system, different firmwares or something like that, what breaks? We can talk about the GDB side of it as well, but going back to your customer side with your patches at a larger organization, what was the fear of the patch like there?
Oh, it was so absolutely scary. I'll go one up you. I attended a live event for a major software provider and the chief developer got up there. The guy in charge of it goes, basically, you know, to paraphrase it, you are not going to be successful in your uptime if you put the latest and greatest out there immediately. He spoke of the fear of the patch, the fear of the new version. And I'm going, wait, your whole business is selling me on this new version and all these great features. And here's the guy going, listen, we lab it, we test it, it goes general available. Wait a minute, let it go out there for a while. Wait for patch one, or as we used to joke in the Microsoft days, the odd service packs were horrible, trying to fix things. The evens really did fix it. Wait a couple months to go in there to see what the general wide scale adoption is. You're going at a deployment from a very small lab environment to full availability. That's the fear. Somebody will do something that wasn't planned and it could break. And what do I do? So, I mean, we've talked about mitigation. We've referenced the data lab, but a lot of folks will say, well, I'll just go on VMware and I'll take a snapshot, or, you know, I'll go to Hyper-V and I'll go ahead and do a checkpoint, which is awesome. But when you forget to clear those, they ruin your backup. So being the great Veeam aficionados that we are, in my world, I'm like, did we Veeam it? Hey, we did. We've got good backups. You know what? If it all goes down, instant recover, move to production, I'm back. So any change management, the fear can be removed by having an eloquent fail back and rollback plan.
Yeah, and obviously you're talking there about, you know, when you're talking about give it a month or so, that's more on the vendor side, on the software, ISV, you know, application side, not necessarily on the Microsoft security patches side.
Right.
Which is its own.
We get into is it the plant? Like, for example, we do weekly patching here at Global Data Vault to avoid patch stacking, and we do it with the labs. So at any point, if you did our scorecard at 30 days, which is kind of our metric, we look amazingly compliant because we are so vigilant, but yet we're running a little bit behind, say a week or two behind, to make sure we lab through those two levels to roll to prod. But you also have, what do they call, the out of band patch. Some vendor says, you better do this or else this is going to happen. And, you know, we've seen it for years where it was like RDP exploits, or VMware had somewhere you could infiltrate one system using calls to get across to another system. And oh my God, there is a execute tonight. We don't care what it will break. So inbound and out of bound fall into there too.
Yeah, we tend to call those 0-day patches.
Yeah.
Right? They're the ones that, you know, the world's going to end if you don't do this. And it potentially could for your business because it could be a rampant thing. What's next? Okay, how often to patch, right? That's what we're talking about. Obviously, it's going to be down to what your business is comfortable with, what your business requires. You may do it weekly, you may do it monthly, you may do it quarterly, except for those 0-day patches, right? You want to make sure that you're applying those as quickly as possible. But like you said, it really comes down to how often you test, how you're able to test the implementation of those patches versus how critical is it for me to apply those, say for tiered systems, your higher tiered applications, lower tiered systems, when do they get patched, right? So it's not a one size fits all. It's more of let's look at this as an organization and figure it out.
Oh, absolutely. And tiered systems. I mean, that is knowing your business. I'm wearing my Batman t-shirt. I don't know if anybody can see it because behind the scenes, we're like the Dark Knight. We're doing all this and people have no idea, except there's times they do need to know. So I think of, there was a scene in one of the Batman movies where the commissioner's up on top of the building and he goes, sometimes I like just to turn this light on so people know that they're out there. It's about communication with patching. Certain systems you need to communicate when they will be down. You might think a file server's no big deal. Imagine if you're in a legal world where they need production data, they need some sort of image, etc. You pull that down, they have hard set deadlines. Well, if you can raise that bat signal and say, Thursday, this will be down, you know what? You're getting ahead of the problem of the emergency. You've let those folks know they better plan on doing their work a little earlier that day. So communication is important when you can do it. Try to cluster it. If you can't, look at your tiers. Tier 1 applications, what's your service delivery SLA? How do I meet it? Let me communicate it. Most folks Global Data Vault at Wednesdays from 12 to 3 Central, you're going to see a ripple of a patch go across. That's by design, the lowest utilized time in our environment. Not for Tier 1 systems, but for all the rest. That is the lowest. How odd is that? Wednesday from 12 to 3 Central, the lowest utilized time. Nobody would guess it. I guess I let the secret out about Global Data Vault.
Yeah. And it's also, you might think of how do I identify these? How do I know what's tiered? How do I know what's impacted? If you watched our last webinar about how to create a disaster recovery plan for your business, it talks about business impact analysis and exactly what touches whom. And that's part of what change management helps with too, by making sure that when you're doing something to a system, the appropriate people for that system are notified. Because like you're saying, a file system may not be that important to some people, but there's some people that's all their job depends on. So it's really important to them.
Yeah, extend past Microsoft, start getting into your switching layer, your hypervisor layer. You have to take down a stack. Well, yeah, that touches so many more people. So that change advisory board is crucial where the stakeholders can sign off and say, here we go. We can have an implicit every Wednesday from this time, everybody approves. And then unless explicitly denied, if you will. But on the other hand, you just have to understand it's communication, it's change management, and this is critical. You cannot not patch, right?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples was in a data center. So a lot of times data centers will have, racks, 42U racks where they store servers, they do network equipment, power equipment, whatever. And business unit thought that they owned the entire rack. Everything that within the rack they thought was theirs. So they were like, well, we need to reboot this. And they sent a ticket out to reboot the switch for that rack. And guess what?
Yeah.
It impacted other people and it took some other critical systems down. So again, that's why we have it in place and, just don't go willy-nilly rebooting stuff.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about a lot of this already. This is sort of a recap. Planned maintenance doesn't affect your SLA. It's not an outage. It is maintenance. There's a big distinction about that. Maintenance planned downtimes do not affect your 99.9 whatever percent. They do not affect your uptime calculations. That's pretty standard. So you don't ever have to worry about that. It's when you go outside of those windows because you didn't plan for something ahead of time that become an issue. Risk versus reward, Tom, we've talked about this. Do you go unpatched? Do you take that risk? Do you wait for the vulnerability to come around 3 years later for something you didn't patch? What do you do?
Right. No, I mean, I look at it this way. I shut a system off for 4 hours. Oh, everybody's really upset. I shut it off for eternity with full data loss and business loss. Risk reward. You don't want to be in either camp, but if I had to, I would much rather have to handle I'm down for shortened periods of time so I'm more secure.
Yeah, and that's where you evaluate business needs. When do you do it? What systems are first? What systems can wait? Think about the applications that run on those, because their SQL patches come out differently from operating system patches, but it's all tied together. You're going to have to reboot that system, right, to get the SQL patch to apply properly, typically, and then make sure you're using change management to just coordinate everything.
Right. And, are you isolating systems? A lot of folks with storage subsystems, do you have them on the open internet? Well, you better not, first of all, but you're isolating that. So at least when you see a 0 day about an internet vulnerability, well, yeah, they're behind the firewall, but they're not even accessible to the web. Maybe a storage system could be a monthly or quarterly racked and stacked, knowing I'm going to clear it off, I'm going to inject it, I'm going to come off, versus, a public web server or something. Like, evaluate those business needs and make the right architecture beforehand to help.
Yeah. It's like back in the day, we used to have IIS, Internet Information Systems, basically web services, 0 day patches that applied only to that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have web servers, don't worry about it. If
right.
you did, evaluate those.
Remember the days of Small Business Server by Microsoft? I hated it.
Oh, Lord, yes. Yeah.
How many things can I cram on the same box? Well, it's convenient, one license and everything. Yeah, but it's Exchange, it's SQL, it's all of these things. And, oh, good Lord, the patching was horrible and the whole organization is down. So now we segment what things do and you coordinate it. It's funny when we talk about SLA, believe it or not, one of the challenges we face most is our reporting. Making sure that something enters into the maintenance window automatically and comes out appropriately during times. So that way, my executive reports and dashboards show I met adherence. But if somebody forgets to put it into a planned maintenance, now I have downtime. What do they say? Something like 4 nines is like, 4 minutes a month you're down or something? I remember that's 5 nines or 4 nines. 4 minutes a month. Man, that's a driver that is really, really hard.
Yep. So onto the tools. Basically, there's just a whole list, right? You can imagine anything. We use a bit of a custom thing. You can use System Center. You can use Windows Software Update Services. There's all kinds of tools out there. My comment on this, find something that works for your business and figure it out. Do what's best for you guys. Just know that there's tools out there if you want it. Tom, what do you think about that?
I agree with you, but I want to think past the execution of the patch. It's not just those labs that we talked about, but it's the compliance reporting. How are my systems faring with available patches? What's my vulnerability maintenance or vulnerability? I want to have that insight so I know, hey, on a monthly basis, I'm at 100% compliance based off of whatever patch. Oh, wait, I have this staging that. Wait, this one hasn't rebooted and has a hung patch. I need some more analytics behind it to make sure that I'm okay. This is before you get to vulnerability testing and all that other good stuff, but just what's the state of the union? And it should cover like WSUS from Windows. It's not going to cover your hypervisors unless they're Hyper-V, but what's your switching? What's your firmware on your blade chassis, on the whatever? You need that holistic system, and sometimes you need layered systems. So don't just buy the biggest and baddest, most expensive. Look at the compliance reporting, look at the labbing, look at the delivery, look at the operating system and hardware, bring it all together and get the right one. Like, I'll throw one horrid word in the word of patching is Linux. How hard can that be sometimes? They're just finally starting to catch up in that world with Spacewalk and some of the third parties. But for years, I'm good on Windows. Oh, that guy Linux, he's kind of like my weird cousin. I don't know what to do with him. So definitely.
And that adds to the complexity that we talked about with multiple operating systems. You're like, oh, I don't know how to do that one. So yeah, we'll just go ahead. I think this is a type of a dashboard that you can expect. Tom, can you walk us through this?
Sure, absolutely. You can take a look up top in this sample. We have 48 failed systems. So out of our total, it looks like 399 systems. 48 have some sort of bad deployment, hung patch, hung feature update, something. Hey, these need my attention. I'm looking at 74 required rebooting, and which sounds like, wow, what does that mean? Well, 74 systems need to get some more patches in there. Are they stacked? Did one work? Did two work? But I can tell, hey, looking at one of these dials, I can see 317 out of 399 are looking good. Well, if I were to issue those reboots, maybe I can go ahead and raise that bar up. 10 unapproved or missing patches. Well, 10 systems, hey, something's going on. And then as I look across, I can look at, hey, how is my patching looking? If there's 509 available, how many are out there? All right, 429. Missing patches by severity. How many criticals, unknowns? Like, I can start gauging my response time to maybe create an out of band catch up, as I call it. I executed my weekly, I did whatever, but I just couldn't get ahead. Maybe there's targeted systems that I do a new planned maintenance outside of regular patch. That's really important on this screen. And then what I like from here are the latest security news. I mean, you want some sort of RSS feed from your known sources telling you things that you should be aware of. In this case, Microsoft Edge had several high vulnerabilities on May 30th. That's important to know. Oh, a 0-day warning vulnerability. I can click that and read about it to decide, do I need to immediately approve it? It's just an education source. And when I use a third-party tool like this, what's amazing is I'm paying the expert in patch management. Just like you come to Global Data Vault because we are the backup experts and DRAS and just will keep you alive, I look to other sources in the industry to tell me what I should be aware of. And that's what this dashboard gives me. It's very, very powerful. What's really cool about this snapshot is I have to apply one lens to it, and then I'll end the dashboard presentation. If I'm in a weekly patch cycle, but I'm on a monthly accountability, my statistics are better than what we see on these dashboards. So this is a real-time look. So let's take a look, computers by operating system. Let's see, by version, missing patches based off release time. Look at that. Greater than 90 days is sitting at 32. I really need to find out why. It's probably those home systems. That's critical. 60 to 90, critical. Hey, 30 to 60, great. 0 to 30, well, here's the good news. You know, if I'm on a monthly patch cycle, I have 41 systems in compliance. It helps me gauge what I'm doing in here. If I was on a quarterly patch, guess what? I'm probably compliant. How vigilant will you be? So you have to read it through the appropriate lens, but some more great data. And you can just drill in these systems. They're wonderful.
All right, we're almost finished here. One thing, again, this goes back to the patch stacking thing, is people forget about their build servers. I worked for an organization that was very large. We had centralized build systems for servers, for data centers. You pick your operating system, you pick, whatever you want, and it deploys the build from that. Basically, when you come back, the server is ready to go, ready for you to connect to it. The problem is when you get there and you run Windows Update or your patch management tool, because when you're pre-deployment, when you're pre-production, you can run Windows Update to see what patches you need because you're not going to impact anything. I'm talking pre-production only for stuff like this, okay? But if you don't update those build servers, and let's say you have a production outage and you come back, you need to rebuild a system from something, and hopefully you're doing it from a backup, but you need a quick build, you need something to go on. Well, you get your operating system down and all of a sudden you need 183 Microsoft patches because the build was created 3 years ago, maybe even a year ago, the way that these patches are released, right? And suddenly you're sitting around for 3 or 4 hours waiting for all your patches to apply, reboots, the next round of patches and reboots. So it's important to maintain a slipstream build. Microsoft has tools that allow you to run a command that will inject their most recent patches into whatever build you have. And also don't forget your desktops, because the desktop guys are doing the same thing. They're trying to deploy the desktops, but they're sitting around for hours waiting for these patches to apply because it hasn't been slipstreamed into the build.
Do you know how many deadlines I've missed in my career? It's more earlier than anything, which was, I'll get that done by Thursday, end of day. Somebody's like, man, it only takes 2 hours. You kick it off at lunch, you go away, you come back, and then you're stuck in 48 hours of reboots and patching. Whereas if you slipstream it, you're only going to apply 5 patches. So I think when you do your monthly patch, it's always applicable either monthly or quarterly. Refresh that slipstream. Put that into your plan. It will save you, and you won't make those mistakes. Like, learn from me. I've missed those deadlines.
Yep. So we can skim through this. We've already talked about it, right? Identification and deployment. Figure out what you need to patch, where you need to patch it. Test it. Veeam's On-Demand Sandbox, which is now called Data Labs, is a great way to test it. And then from then you roll it to production.
It's a great system. You've got to have your rollback. Use Veeam. It's wonderful.
Yeah. mentioning rollbacks, you talked about hypervisor snapshots and virtual machine snapshots a little bit earlier. Those are great point in time things for quick changes. Again, if you're applying 100 patches, you don't want to rely on a snapshot for that because it's going to incorporate every single one of those patches into a snapshot. If you have to roll back somewhere, you're going to be doing it from the very beginning. Also, like you said, those things get left out there and they cause production issues and space issues. It's just not best practice to use that as a data protection strategy. It's quick if, hey, I want to make this change to a system. Let me take a quick snapshot, make a quick change. Everything looks good. Okay, commit the snapshot and move on or fall back, right? Those are easy ways. Who and what will be impacted? Obviously, we've talked about change management to understand that and then have good backups. What are your thoughts?
I think you hit everything. I mean, I think we've all been around long enough to know you have a backup. Like whenever you do change management, I always formulate what's my rollback plan almost before I start my execution. Those are all the bullet points there. Veeam Data Labs all day long. That's what you're going to do. Your rollback is Veeam. And then great. You know what? This is exactly what you need.
And the nice thing about that too is, do you have good backups? With Veeam backup and replication, you could go into that machine before you're going to patch it and just do a manual backup right then. And it doesn't take very long, but it's an actual backup. It's not a hypervisor snapshot. So you're guaranteed to have better protection because not that it could happen, but what happens if you have a hypervisor issue during a patch cycle when you have a snapshot open? I mean, there's so many other things that we could go on forever, but we won't.
No. And I saw one time, it was weird. They had an unsigned driver. They applied a patch to a net framework. They rebooted. The patch was fine. The unsigned driver went sideways, could not get it back. You know what? Veeam brought it back to life because we were able to go back. It's just, you got to hedge your bet.
Yeah. So quickly, I know that you've already talked about this a bit, but just run us through this.
Sure. Vulnerability scans. I mean, you need some sort of entity, software, SOC, some group out there in your organization finding out where you are vulnerable. I'm not just talking about penetration testing. I deliberately did not use pen when we wrote this. It was more of tell me what's vulnerable where. Let it worm through and find your switch firmware, your blade interconnect module firmware, your OSs. You need a regular scan to know where am I vulnerable in there. Required patching, listen, you've got to have a patch methodology. Get over the fear. You're going to have to change the culture of your organization to say there will be some downtime, but you're moving the ball towards more secure. Hypervigilance is essential. Absolutely. Again, do I want it off for 4 hours or for eternity? Keep your pace in there. Be hypervigilant. And of course, the 3-2-1 rule. Veeam, 3 copies, 2 different locations, 1 should be off site. You need to make sure if this all goes bad, you can bring it back up.
So obviously, Global Data Vault, we are a Veeam services provider, fully managed white glove service for backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, and Office 365 backup. We work with VMware, Hyper-V, Acropolis, which is Nutanix, physical servers, and endpoints. So obviously, because we do all that, we maintain the patching on our end for the systems that are required to support all of that.
Yeah, I go to my Star Wars roots. I kind of think about, hey, you're our last hope sort of thing. And
you're wearing a Batman shirt. You can't go there, dude.
I can. I'm an IT guy. I can go to any nerd reference available, okay? Batman could have a lightsaber for all I care. But
that'd be pretty cool. That would be pretty cool.
It would. So at Global Data Vault, we know that if you're calling us, it is the worst day of your life. Like, we love our customers, but it's so much better when we don't have to talk to them because we know their lives are good. But if you're making that phone call, this is the worst day of your life. We need to make sure that we bring up a good sound environment and secure because, believe it or not, the number one environment we bring up is a dirty environment. Now, where it has something, we're recovering it, and then we have to roll it back. So knowing that we have to inject that, not only do we have to be hypervigilant on our architecture, but that security as well. So that word, hypervigilant, we practice what we preach.
Awesome. Great conversation on patching. I have a few questions that we regularly receive around the topic, and I'm going to check chat real quick. No questions in chat, but I'm going to pose a couple of questions that we get on the regular. So I think you guys are probably prepared for these. Number one, does Global Data Vault send out maintenance notices when patching?
So we do typically send out maintenances for out-of-band patches, so those emergencies, but we do have a standard patching window, Wednesdays, 12 p.m. Central to 3 p.m. Central. Because those are regular and expected, we do not usually communicate those in our systems.
Okay. And another one, should patching be a part of your DR plan?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Best way to save a DR plan is to not have to enact it, so to speak. So step one, patch and be secure before you have to fix what went wrong. So absolutely. Yeah, that's paramount.
Yeah, and even going back to the slipstreaming thing is make sure that you have maybe even multiple copies of builds with different patch levels. Make sure you have all that stuff ready at hand. Have patches because you don't know your internet capabilities, you don't know your resources. If you're going to have to apply patches, make sure that you can maybe do those without having to download them from the internet or, something like that. Just have a resource ready. Maybe take all your patches and back those up to us so that you have a repository just for your business, so the patches that you need. It's another option, but yeah, it should be considered.
Yeah, and those third-party systems, what's so great about them is exactly what you're talking about. As you bring down your patches, you're not bringing down, like we have 700 or 800 systems. I always lose track of what we have because we just keep growing these things. And I can't bring down 800 times a patch, but I can have deployment centers to help ease my network load and go. So,
Yep.
Okay, last question. Do you prefer Windows-based patch systems or a third party?
I'll give to Kelly and then I'll come back in so I can dance.
I hate saying it depends, but it depends. I mean, is your organization Microsoft based? Do you have a wide deployment of Microsoft System Center Operations Manager? Do you have all kinds of Microsoft certified guys? Is your environment, highly Microsoft or highly homogeneous in its operating system deployments? Do you have a mix of VMware, Hyper-V? Do you have Linux servers? Do you have Oracle? Do you have Sun servers? There's all kinds of different things that could not work with Microsoft base that could work better with third-party tools that encapsulate more of those types of things. So I hate to say it depends, but it's really dependent upon your organization and the structure and the way your organization is laid out that, whatever makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, and then I'm going to piggyback with a simple I concur. Kelly hit it.
Cop out.
Okay, one more question from chat. What happens if a patch causes issues? Does Global Data Vault have rollback options?
Absolutely. So as long as you're Veeam protected, you can roll back to your last known good backup. So if you are into a standard SLA for 8 hours, there you go. If you're on a 1 hour, there you go. But Kelly hit something really important when he spoke about the change management side, which is what is my rollback plan? Your rollback, he had actually mentioned, maybe you should take a manual backup before you begin this process, and it's quick. So let's say we add a good 20 minutes on or 30 minutes onto our maintenance window. We perform a manual backup for a point in time, right when things are taken out of service. We do what we need to do. It all goes south. We roll it back. There's actually zero downtime in there. So in your change window, it's take that manual backup. Then you have what we call the point of no return. I've traversed, say, 2 hours. If I'm not back after 2 hours, I must enact the rollback plan and put that back up into production and come out of maintenance and figure it out later. So yes, we absolutely do. And it touches on Tristo. Your first question was, should it be a part of the DR plan? Absolutely. It all encompasses that rollback.
And Tom, even, at Global Data Vault, we also have our enhanced data protection recovery options that we can help customers use because customers won't have access to it. But, in that instance, we do have other things available as well. If they restore to a backup that's not good, that's infected, et cetera, we've got an additional layer of protection there for them.
Absolutely. We can bring you back from right to the brink.
Awesome. So I think that wraps it up for today. We appreciate all of your time. For anybody who's watching, we have some great previous webinars you can access on our website at globaldatavault.com/webinars. And I would be remiss as a marketing director if I didn't encourage you to also follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn for all of these guys' greatness and more. So, all right. I think that's a wrap. Come back again next month and we'll have another great topic to share with you. So,
thanks, everybody.
Thanks.